Hello, everybody, and welcome back into another season preview show here at the Hockey Writers Podcast. We're about halfway through the league now, and we're going to be doing the Columbus Blue Jackets here. And you've got some familiar faces here from Union Junction, Mark Scheig and Nicholas Arnold. Thanks, guys, for coming on the preview show here at the Hockey Writers Podcast. First time, I think both of you have been, well, Nick, you've been on our audio version, but Mark, you're rookie here. So thanks both of you for coming on.
Have to show me the ropes here, Matt.
But yeah, like I say, thanks for coming on the show. And Columbus Blue Jackets did some pretty big things in the off season, and I believe the last episode of Union Junction we talked about one of these guys quite a bit. So let's get started with the forwards and the new additions, and the big one, Johnny Gaudreau. This guy, of course, coming over from the Calgary Flames. Very surprising he signed with the Columbus Blue Jackets. But here he is, and he's going to be here for a long time. So I want to start with you, Mark, and talking about Gaudreau. What are your expectations for him coming into this season? New city, new team. He's only played for the Calgary Flames. What are your expectations coming into this season?
Matt, I think that a lot of fans need to kind of temper their expectations a little bit, because he's going to a new team. He's got to learn a whole new system under a new head coach. He's going to be playing with some new teammates. So this is something where he's still a really good player. He's been a really good player for a long time. I mean, I think going back, he's 6th or 7th overall for those that have reached 300 assists back to 2016 and 17. So you're talking about one of the ultimate playmakers, and perhaps one of the best players to join the Blue Jackets in their franchise history. So there's reason to be excited about him. Yes, absolutely. But to expect, he had 115 points last year and 75 assists. To expect that, both of his line mates reached 42 goals. And I'm not sure that the Blue Jackets have the forward depth to compete with the way that the Flames looked, but he's certainly going to come in. He's certainly going to make players better. And of course, the obvious thing is, do he and Patrik Laine get to play together? Coach Brad Larson has said that that's probably going to happen to start, but he still has to watch the chemistry factor. So at the end of the day, Patrik Laine has never played with a better player in his NHL career thus far. And you could possibly make the argument that Johnny Gaudreau is going to have the best sniper he's ever had in his NHL career. So if they can develop that, and then whoever plays center, they should get a bump from. It could be Jack Roslovic, it could be Boone, it could be Cole Sillinger, maybe even Kent Johnson if he has a really good camp. So I think 80, 90 points is something that you can realistically expect, but don't go overboard. For him to get to 115, a lot would have to go right. But he's still going to be a very dynamic player and somebody that's going to elevate the Blue Jackets to an even better offense than they were last year.
Yeah, him joining the Blue Jackets really changes a lot in their forward group. And you shouldn't expect a lot, especially that 100 points. That was his first time he's ever hit 100 points in his career. He had 99 before that, but that was quite a few seasons ago too. So he's going to hit that. I fully believe will be 80 plus for sure. But that 100 points, it's the same thing in Vancouver with JT Miller. I don't expect that to hit almost 100 points again. That's a big season. So, but very exciting to see Gaudreau, and Columbus Blue Jackets as a team just going to be really exciting to watch this year. I think, coupled with him and Laine and, all those young guys, we're going to talk a few of them in a sec, but it's going to be exciting to watch the Blue Jackets this year for sure.
Yep.
So yeah, let's get going. Right?
Let's do this thing.
All right, Nick, I want to go to you and talk about, this is not a young guy anymore. He's a veteran now, and second season coming in as the captain. Had a bit of a resurgence last year, best season since 2015-16. This is Boone Jenner. What do you expect from him this season? Second season as the captain, now surrounded by a few better, well, maybe not a few better players, but one really good player. Where do you see Jenner kind of falling this season?
For sure, I think last year was not an aberration. In years prior, he had been kind of more in a sheltered, lower, bottom six role as, a reliable two-way player. But he does have that 30-goal season on his resume, as you kind of mentioned. He can do that again if he finds himself in the right opportunity. If he slots in as their number one center in between Laine and Gaudreau, I don't see why there's any reason why he couldn't, have another career year on top of last year. When I think of the Blue Jackets forward core, I kind of think that maybe taking Paul Kariya and Teemu Selanne approach from the Mighty Ducks in the early 2000s might be a good move for the Blue Jackets. They just had Steve Ruchin centering them. Good two-way guy. He can put the puck in the net if you need it to. That's exactly what Boone Jenner can play. He can make up for any defensive lapses and kind of allow Gaudreau and Laine to do what they do best, and that's score. So if he is the number one center, then I don't see why he shouldn't have another best year of his career.
The only thing I want to add to that is just watch the injury. He's coming off of the back injury. You just wonder how much they're going to play him. If they're going to play top line minutes, you just wonder if they're going to kind of put him on a little bit of a pitch count, or at least watch his minutes to start.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking when you're talking about that, and Gaudreau's used to playing Elias and Lindholm, and he's, I don't know, I want to compare them, but they're both good two-way centers. So it's like, you don't know. I mean, Jenner, if he's healthy and he's good with that, back injuries are a thing you can keep flaring up, right? So, definitely have to be careful with that. But even if he is what he kind of was the role last season, he wasn't that number one center a lot of the time. Still pretty good. I mean, had 26 goals, I believe it was. So I expect him to be a good player again this season too, and the leadership factors of course obvious. So he'll still be doing that. Okay, let's talk about the guy that everyone loves to talk about on Union Junction, on everywhere, is Patrik Laine. I signed an extension finally. I just, wasn't part of, talking about it all season long last year with Union Junction, but finally signed that extension, and he will be here for a bit. So, Mark, I wanted to talk to you about Laine. What are your expectations for this season? We've already talked about him kind of maybe playing with Gaudreau, but not just for this season, but for the duration of this contract.
Well, don't say I told you so, fans, but we told you so. If you've tuned into the show, we told you, do not worry about this. It's going to happen eventually. And both sides were truthful. They love him. He loves it in Columbus. He was actually seen at the Cincinnati Bengals game the other day. So he's in a much better situation. And I think that's ultimately going to lead to success for him, where he's finally feeling comfortable about himself. I feel like that there's enough time that has gone away from the trade in order for him to really be able to focus on hockey and to put him on a line with Gaudreau. I mean, he said it when we talked to him after he signed a new contract. He didn't even believe it when they signed Gaudreau. And just you could just hear the excitement in his voice that he's ready to come in and perhaps have the best season of his career, assuming that they have the chemistry. So this year, it could be something pretty special. It could be something special in other years as well, obviously, depending if they're able to play together, if they're able to play with a center that can get that chemistry going. I think the one thing to certainly watch, though, is maybe the effort level a little bit. I know that he gets a little bit of a bad rap, I think, unfairly when it comes to the way he plays. That he's a one-trick pony, that he can shoot the puck, but he can do so much more than that. And I think that we're finally going to start to see kind of the full repertoire that Laine can provide here. I wouldn't put 50 goals past him. I know a lot would have to happen for that to be able to work out. But when you have a playmaker like Gaudreau that can feed him the puck, and he gets power play time and top line minutes with somebody like him, he could have a very special season. It's certainly within range. I think 40 goals this year and 40 goals average throughout the life of the contract is very reasonable, with some even higher upside if everything works out well. But regardless, it's going to be exciting to have him locked down with the Blue Jackets for the next 4 years filling the net.
Yeah, I anticipate that at least 40 goals, that shot on the power play, and having Gaudreau feed him the puck. I wouldn't want to go on the power play with these guys for sure, trying to kill penalties. Okay, let's go back to a young guy. I'm kind of doing a little bit of a so this is the first big guy that wasn't expected to do anything last season. Cole Sillinger, 18-year-old coming in. Everyone thought maybe the 9 games like Mason McTavish got in Anaheim, but he didn't. He played 79 games. He played almost the whole season. So Nick, I want to ask you, this is always a question for guys that come into the league and have a good rookie season. How does Cole Sillinger avoid that sophomore slump this year?
I think that's going to be entirely dependent on who he plays with and kind of even his preparation throughout the summer. If he bulked up, like we heard Kent Johnson has added 8 pounds of muscle mass since the World Junior Championship, which is just bonkers. If Sillinger did a similar amount of effort towards this season, and he can stay healthy and keep playing through those games, I mean, like you mentioned, he was the only player from last year's draft to play the full season, drafted at 12th overall, which is bonkers to think. Like, when was the last time that happened? I don't know. Do you know? No,
not
exactly.
Off the top of my head, no.
Outside the top 10 to be the only guy to play, that's crazy. So I don't see why he couldn't, maintain that play. When I look at who he could play with this season, there's the thought of putting the Blue Jackets kid line together. You put him with Kent Johnson and Kirill Marchenko. That's looking pretty fun on the third line. There's just so many possibilities, and I don't see why he doesn't get a bit of a boost from the other young guns that come into the lineup.
Yeah, well, I love Sillinger's game before the draft, and I was actually really surprised he got drafted that high, but he sure proved that he's deserved of that position in the draft. So I'm excited to see what he can do in his second season, because he's going to have some pretty good wingers to play with, even if it is Marchenko, because he's really good too. And playing with Johnson would be amazing. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what he can do this year. Well, Mark, we mentioned this guy, Kent Johnson, and he's been on a lot of people's radar for a while. World Juniors he had the golden goal. He scored the golden goal after Mason McTavish made that ridiculous save at the other end. But what do you expect of Kent Johnson this season? He had that last bit of the season with the Blue Jackets, but probably anticipating a little more. Can he emerge as that Calder Trophy candidate this year?
Boy, Matt, I think that's going to come down to where he gets slotted in the lineup, because you think about the top six, especially the wingers wise. We've already touched on Laine. We've already touched on Gaudreau. We have not touched on Gus Nyquist and Jake Voracek yet. And those could easily be the way that the top six wingers start the year. So where would you put Kent Johnson? Would he be on that kind of that kid line that Nick was mentioning on a third line? Would he even be on a fourth line? I mean, I think this is an important camp for him. Nick already mentioned coming in, stronger, which is obviously what you want to see. He needed to do that, obviously, knowing what the rigors of the NHL are going to be like. So the one thing he didn't do last year, of all things, was score an NHL goal. He basically did everything else, but did not score an NHL goal. He got a couple points and assists, but you could just kind of tell that bothered him. And he took the offseason to really prepare. You could see it in the World Junior Championship. I mean, he's in the Olympics as well, in the World Championship. You're talking about a very rare feat here. And you're talking about someone that he could be one of the more special players that the Blue Jackets have ever had if he hits his upside. But for this season, though, training camp-wise, he still has a lot to prove. His spot is not guaranteed. He has to go out there and he has to prove that he belongs, as they're not afraid to send him down to Cleveland if he's not ready. So can he be that Calder favorite? Sure, there's certainly that possibility if he works his way up in the lineup. Maybe when he gets to be that number one center between Laine and Gaudreau, there's a path there. But at the beginning, the way that the lineup is shaken up here, we'll see. He's got to still prove a lot, and his Calder candidacy will go if he's able to get higher in the lineup.
Yeah, well, he definitely has the potential to do that. It's just, is it, like you said, is it this year? And it shouldn't be a panic if it's not this year. I mean, it doesn't have to. So, you don't want to rush him either. And, Sillinger had a good rookie season. We'll anticipate he may have it too. But again, Sillinger's a lot better defensively, I think, than Johnson at this point. So we'll have to see, and it's just gonna be exciting. It'll be exciting just to watch him in training camp, because I've been excited about him ever since he was, when drafted and in that draft year, because I was hoping a little bit that the Canucks been able to get him, but of course that didn't happen because he got
and Traverse City
ahead.
too. So that you'll get the opportunity to watch Johnson, Traverse City as the number one center. So that'll be your first look.
Go. Yeah, well, that's exciting. That's starting. Well, we're recording this the day before that's going to be going on. So that's going to be fun to watch too. All right, Nick, I want to talk about this guy because he had to be traded because they needed cap space. So this is a guy that scored over 20 goals last year, Oliver Bjorkstrand, traded to the Seattle Kraken. That's 20 goals out of the lineup now. So they got Gaudreau, which of course will play some of that. But who else do you anticipate kind of coming in and stepping into that and trying to replace those 20 goals that are missing now with Bjorkstrand in Seattle?
Well, that was a tough loss. A lot of fans felt that one hard because he was a fan favorite, but that is the reality of the salary cap world we live in. Bjorkstrand had 28 goals last year, which is the best of his career. But the one thing to remember about Bjorkstrand is he was a little streaky from time to time. So, he'd be hot for a few weeks and cold for a few weeks. So to make up for that offense, which was 57 points, it's not super much considering the amount of talent that the Blue Jackets do have. I mean, one of the knocks against the Blue Jackets is that apparently they don't have enough talent, but if you really look at it, it's a logjam at all positions, and there's no shortage of guys who can step up and take that offense on. Like you mentioned, Gaudreau, that instantly replaces Bjorkstrand, his production anyways. Cole Sillinger, if he takes a step forward, Kirill Marchenko, if he plays a full season, it's not unreasonable to expect 30 points from him. So there is no dearth of players who can step in to fill that void, but it's going to be tough in the locker room because he was an assistant captain and one of the more valued guys around Columbus.
Yeah, well, I was anticipating something like that happening, but I actually didn't think Bjorkstrand was going to be the guy that was going to be traded, and for rather little. I mean, it wasn't a lot that they got for him. So, he's going to be in Seattle, probably playing the top 6 role there. So we'll have to see how he does there. But I think Columbus really replaced a lot of his offense with Gaudreau and with probably the guys that are actually going to emerge, the young guys that are going to emerge this year. So it's going to be exciting to see who will eventually do it. But it's just salary cap world. That's just how it goes.
for the salary cap situation the Jackets were in, for them to not have to give up a first or a second round draft pick to be able to clear that cap space, that should be considered a win for Blue Jackets fans.
For sure. Okay, well, now let's talk about the overall forward group. We didn't mention everyone because that would take forever to go through everyone on this team. But how do you see the forward group matching up with the other teams in this ridiculously stacked Metropolitan division? It's just gotten better this season, probably all around.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that anymore because you look at all the teams. I mean, everybody's got a formidable team. You can make the argument that 6 to 7 of these teams have either a strong playoff chance or at least a wild card contender. So depending on injuries, depending on who steps up, there's an argument that could be made that a lot of these teams can do well. So from a Blue Jackets standpoint, forward wise, I could put them with anybody. They without Johnny Gaudreau, they were near a top 10 offense. Goal scoring was not their problem at all. Defensively, though, that's another story altogether. And everybody on the team knew it last year. I think they understand that, there's going to be questions surrounding that this year for the forward group as well, and trying to be able to go back as well. And it's, are they able to do enough to be able to offset some of those questions? And that's where I think they sort of fall behind some of the teams in the Metropolitan Division. Like you think about the New York Rangers. I think a lot of people believe that they're going to go very far with Shesterkin, and that with the forward group that they have, Panarin, Zibanejad, we can go on with Lafreniere as well, taking the next step. The Penguins, you talk about Crosby, Malkin, you can keep going down. Carolina's solid. Capitals are still solid. I know they're without Nicholas Backstrom to start, but still, Matt Barzell's on the Islanders. You can come out. The Flyers are actually getting healthier with Couturier and Kevin Hayes both coming back. And the Devils have Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier down the middle. So that's the question always surrounding the Blue Jackets, is the center depth. And I think that's the one area where they have centers, but do they have the ones that can compete with this division? And if they're able to meet that, that's where they'll start to see some success at this point. So comparatively speaking, a little bit weak at center, but overall they can compete with anybody goal scoring wise. And adding Gaudreau is only going to help that situation for them.
Oh, yeah, I think their wings are fine. Yeah, like you say, the centermen, if some of the younger centermen can step up, and like Sillinger, Johnson, I mean, that's a lot to put on these guys, but if they can do it, they're right there too. So this team in general is just going to be interesting to watch, forward wise for sure. And for the rest, let's talk about them now. Let's talk about the defense, because like you said, they're a little bit, I mean, they're okay. They've got a few good guys, of course. Of course, there's a pretty good group, but they did only added one guy in free agency, and it was not a huge guy. This is Erik Gudbranson, and I'm very familiar with this guy from Vancouver, and he didn't really do that well over here. But he's kind of bounced back in Calgary. He was pretty good. In a system that probably suited him. So, Mark, I want to talk to you about Gudbranson. And do you think he's going to be good in Columbus? I mean, he's a pretty big price tag for what he brings. But like I said, he was pretty good in Calgary.
Yeah. They were very much lacking somebody like Gudbranson. You looked at the defense last year. They really didn't have much in the way of size. They had guys that tried to play that role, Andrew Peeke being one of them, and did an admirable job for the situation. But they didn't have that 6'4" guy that can play on the penalty kill, that could be a physical presence, that can kind of shelter some of the younger defensemen that they have. And you made the good point, Matt, that Gudbranson's price tag was higher, because there were teams that were willing to pay that. And Columbus had to fork out $4 million and give 4 years for him to come down to Columbus. But they realized that defense was a big priority for them. Now, I think it's pretty fair to say that the Gaudreau situation kind of changed what they were looking to do, as there are all sorts of rumors about them going after Jacob Chychrun, maybe even Ryan McDonough, among others. But when they landed Gaudreau, obviously you're not going to pass that up. And they signed Gudbranson before the Gaudreau news came down. So you kind of wonder if they would have done that knowing if the Gaudreau news came down first, but it still fills a need for them. He wasn't brought on to be a top pair defenseman. He was brought on to help solidify the bottom four while being able to play on the penalty kill and while being able to bring a physical presence to the team. I think there's bigger questions on the defense about who's going to slot in where, but Gudbranson's going to be fine, and he's going to be a leader and someone that the defense is going to look up to as well. I mean, you're not looking at him to be the savior of that defense at all. If you're looking at that, then you got unrealistic expectations. But he is going to at least be solid enough. I wouldn't be surprised if a pair like Gudbranson and Vladislav Gavrikov end up together. I think that's a very intriguing middle pair. And if that doesn't work out, you can put him on the bottom pair with somebody like Boqvist, Bean, or Blankenburg to play with him. But if he's in that bottom pair, I think you've got him slotted correctly. And I think there will be some improvement. I mean, they were pretty bad last year, so they can't go much further down than where they were. So keep your expectations in check, and I think we'll be good with Gudbranson.
Yeah, I in Vancouver, I think the expectations were way too high for him because he was brought in to solidify the top four, and he's not that type of defenseman. So, I mean, he's still very serviceable. Like I said, he was very solid in Calgary, probably the most solid that I've seen him. So we'll have to see how he does in Columbus. All right, Nick, Mark mentioned him briefly there. Nick Blankenburg brought back, pretty good had a little bit of a very short stint last year, but he impressed a lot of people. How big of a role do you think he has in this defense this season?
This defense is full of question marks. And it's, I mean, we knew that they had to add somebody like Gudbranson, but we didn't think about really who's going to fall out of that picture. because I mean, if you count them, they've got 7 or 8 guys who should be NHL regulars. So Blankenburg, being as young as he is, I mean, he was definitely a favorite of Coach Brad Larsen's. He loved this guy. It's just, where is he going to slot in and who's going to fall out of the lineup? Because if you put Blankenburg in, then either Bean, Boqvist, I mean, even Gavin Bayreuther, they're out of the lineup. It's going to be interesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did kind of like when you see the goalies go with a 3-man rotation in the bottom 6, see 3 guys kind of cycle in and play every 2 out of every 3 games or whatever, because it's going to be a mix down there. And if Blankenburg can step up, I mean, he played pretty well for, your first 7 games alongside Zach Werenski. So, I mean, is he a guy who could be there long term? I don't see why not. He's a smaller guy, but as Brad Larsen said last season, he didn't seem to get the memo that he's only 5'9" or whatever. But yeah, he's going to be an interesting player to watch. And my hot take would be that he's a sneaky Calder guy if he does get regular minutes, because he really did impress last season.
I love that. Everyone knows, watch Prospect Corner, I love the smaller guys. So I love that Blankenburg is looking good. Again, very early in his career, but we'll have to see what he does this season and hopefully his first full season in the NHL. But he's going to be exciting to watch and see what he can do. All right, Mark, let's talk about a guy that the Columbus Blue Jackets drafted this past season. Been talk about him potentially making the team out of training camp. Do you think that's a possibility, David Jiricek?
It is a possibility, and it's one of the storylines of the early camp to watch. I mean, when he dropped to 6th, I don't think the Blue Jackets could have raced to the stage enough, because that is their Seth Jones replacement. So now if you look back at the trade, they got a haul and a half for Seth Jones. And Jiricek can eventually fill the role of a number 1 D and anchor right shot defenseman who can play on your power play, who can shoot the puck, and who can be physical. It's just the obvious question now, is he ready?
Yeah. And
he's played against men, so there's certainly a chance. But the Blue Jackets, I mean, when they talked about Cole Sillinger last year, Brad Larsen always said, we were always looking for a reason to get rid of him, and we could never do it. So if Jiricek is going to be the one to do it this year on defense, and Nick talked about it, there's oodles of questions on defense. If he impresses in camp, there's certainly a case to be made that he could start there for sure, and then right up the road in Cleveland if he needs a little bit more development. But he brought up another good point about just how many NHL-ready defensemen there are on this roster. So in order for Jiricek to play, he would have to have a better camp consistently than any of those 7 or 8 other defensemen. So that's going to be the story to watch. So is it possible? Absolutely. It's just a matter of how does his camp go? How does he look in the games? And is he ready for the rigors of the NHL? And from everything that we've seen, when he's been on the international stage, he's done well for himself. So I think there's a better than 50-50 shot that it can happen, but by no means is a guarantee that he makes the Blue Jackets out of camp.
Yeah, well, there's another story to watch, like you said. And Jiricek is probably, I'd say, he's probably the closest to an NHL defenseman from that top end of the draft. So, he can, like you say, he definitely can do it, but he's going to have to beat out quite a few guys to do it. So again, there's another guy. Don't panic if he doesn't make the team. He's still going to be really good for this team in the future. Okay, Nick, let's talk about Adam Boqvist now. And coming over from the Chicago Blackhawks, had a pretty good season last year, 11 goals. But, I mean, he still has a lot of growth still to come in his game. So what are you expecting in year 2 in Columbus?
He's one of those guys who needed to get bigger this offseason, because while he was, offensively just dynamic, he was very easy to be pushed around in the defensive zone. So he's one of those guys where you look at, like, he's going to need to have gotten bigger to warrant more ice time. And if he gets more ice time, 20 goals isn't out of the question for Adam Boqvist. Whether that happens this year or the year after that or whenever, that's still to be determined. But this guy is electric. And, he needs to really adjust to the NHL game a little bit more. But I mean, we've seen his offense in flashes. Last year, like you mentioned, 11 goals through 52 games. That was pretty darn good comparing amongst the rest of NHL defensemen. But the other thing is injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's hit him throughout his young career. Last year, only 52 games. The year before that, only 35. So that's also something, if he gets a little stronger, you hope that would mitigate injuries. But there's so much talent, so much young talent on the Blue Jackets. And there's so many question marks about who's going to slot in where, that this season is just going to be so exciting to watch, and such a huge year for the development of the Blue Jackets moving forwards.
Yeah, well, like you said, they choose part of that Hall Seth Jones trade too. So we just talked about two pieces of that. Oh my gosh, that trade was just such a win for the Blue Jackets. Looking at it now. All right, Mark, we'll go back now, talk about the defense matching up in this Metropolitan Division, of course, led by Zach Werenski. I totally forgot his name. At the beginning, I was trying to mention him right at the beginning of this segment. I was stumbling, and I'm like, I can't do it. But Zach Werenski still leading this defense, and he's got, like we've talked about, quite a few defensemen behind him. What do you think of how they match up in this division?
I feel like it's middle of the pack if you take a look at the Metro in terms of the defense, and you look at some of the teams, like you look at the Flyer situation. Ryan Ellis is coming back. Ivan Provorov. So you're talking, I think I preferred the Blue Jackets with Werenski and Adam Boqvist upside. I think that you can make the argument there. I think, New Jersey has Dougie Hamilton and then a bunch of question marks after that. But then you look at the rest of the division. I mean, Adam Fox with the Rangers, obviously very good. Chris Letang still very good with the Penguins. Hurricanes added Brett Burns to an already really good defense. The Islanders 3 of Palak, Polak, and Dobson are going to be really good. So the Blue Jackets have questions. There's no doubt about that. But middle of the pack, I think, is certainly reasonable. There's reason to believe that they're going to at least get better. And it really depends on the work that the Blue Jackets defensemen put in this summer. Did they get stronger? And I think more importantly, are they going to make more of a commitment to play defense? Like, it has to be important to them. Like, we know that they can be good offensively, but can they put the same sort of effort in on defense as well to be able to prevent the goals against? Like a lot of people looked at the goaltending last year, and they definitely struggled. There's no doubt about that. But the defensemen as an overall whole struggled because of the lack of experience. Very few of them had less than 100 games in the NHL. I think Werenski and Gavrikov might have been the only ones that had over 100 games. So experience-wise, I think they're going to be a little bit better off, but there's still enough question marks, and it just proves how tough the Metro is when the state of the rest of the defenses are still in a much better place right now. But the Blue Jackets at least are on a good path. And I think that's what we're looking for this season, to continue that development and to continue to get better.
Yeah, and they've got quite a few pretty good young defense. We talked already about one of them. They got quite a few other guys in the system coming up too. So it's going to be exciting to see how this defense develops and who they think is too good to build around. So it's going to, again, this is just an added bonus to what the Blue Jackets are going to be in the next few years. They're going to be a really good team.
And just Denton Matejchuk is going to be a star.
Yes, yeah.
Oh. So just watch out for that.
I love Matejchuk. He was probably one of my favorites at the top of the draft there. So for Columbus to come away with Jiricek and Matejchuk, insane.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about the goaltending, last line of defense, and talk about Elvis Merzlikins coming in as, well, de facto starter. So what do you think? Does he emerge as the Vezina Trophy-caliber goaltender that we have seen in flashes from him?
Well, last year he got completely shelled. I mean, he faced the 4th most shots in the league, which is whoa.
Yeah.
For a first-year starter to be getting that kind of workload was unbelievable. He still held his own. He had a .907 save percentage, but his goals against average at .322. That just shows how shelled he was, how many shots he faced. Because it's rare to see someone with over 9 save percentage and over 3 goals against average. But it really ties in with the defense. That's going to be the number one deciding factor for me anyways, is if they play better defense in front of him, yeah, he can be a Vezina caliber goaltender. That's really all that it comes down to for me, is because he was reliable last season. Towards the end of the year, he played pretty much every game of the last quarter, and he didn't complain. He was fired up to go every night. Even if he let in a few goals, he's bounced back pretty well over the stretch. So he's definitely another fun guy to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this many times, it's like you look at these goaltenders, and defense is a lot of the reason why they're good. And look at Martin Brodeur. Would he be really good against a team, in back of a team that gave up a ton of shots? I don't know. Like, you don't know. He never had to do that. So defense ties up a lot to that.
Sergei Bobrovsky won 2 Vezinas with Columbus, went to Florida, and didn't really do so well in his first season or two, right?
It's interesting to see, goaltending and defense really go together quite a bit. So
yeah,
we'll have to see what happens this year. All right, Mark, let's talk about the guy that everyone didn't expect him to be back. Joonas Korpisalo. Talked about a lot about him last year, about him being traded, never was, but he comes back. So what are your expectations for him, and will he finish the season in Columbus?
I think we could talk a lot of time about that. I mean, we said that he was going to be gone, and he's back. If there's anything about Joonas Korpisalo that we can depend on, he's a very hard worker, and we knew that he's coming back from an injury. So ultimately, we believe that he's going to have a point to prove. And I think that's part of the reason why that he ultimately was not traded. His year was so bad last year with everything that went on, obviously indirectly related to Matisse Kivlenik's situation, and just they had to overcome so many different challenges. He could just never find his footing. And so when the season started kind of going off the rails, he was never able to recover. And it just became a huge snowball effect to where there was just no value in, no one was willing to take him on. So this ultimately was going to be the question, was how was the Blue Jackets going to address the number 2 situation? And why not stick with the guy that you know the best, who has performed, who has been an all-star in the past? If you get an improved defense and you couple that with someone that has a big-time point to prove, he can come back and certainly be better. And both of them have to be better if the Blue Jackets are going to even try to think about sniffing the playoffs here. Will he stay? Well, it depends on how his individual season goes, and it also depends on if they're in the playoff hunt. If they're in the playoff hunt, they might want to stick with that. And then Daniil Tarasov, I know we might talk about him a little bit later on. He's the 3rd goalie, and if he's ready to go, I don't think they'll have any issue putting him up there if a trade opportunity comes. But I think it's too early to think about what his future is going to be, because the season does have to play out. I think it's completely dependent on that. There's a chance that he goes because it's just a 1-year deal. But, like last year, there's a chance that he stays, and there's certainly a chance that he can rebound. And if there's anybody that's going to work hard, like I said, it's going to be Korpisalo. He has a lot to prove if he's going to have a future in this league.
Oh, for sure. And do you think Merzlikins, though, is pretty much the starter? It's not going to be like a 1A, 1B type thing?
I think he goes in at least at the beginning as the starter. But if he struggles, that could open a door.
Yeah. Well, Nick, let's talk about the guy that could force that door. And Mark mentioned him, Daniil Tarasov, and had a pretty good stint there, but then he had that injury and took him out of the rest of the season, and had to rehab throughout the off season. Does he become a factor at some point this season?
Well, when I look at the goaltending on the Columbus Blue Jackets this year, it's kind of like deja vu of last year. You know, Korpisalo's on an expiring contract. Merzlikins is signed with the presumably starting goaltender deal. And then Tarasov is just waiting in the wings. And, you know, both of the guys ahead of him have had some injury issues in the past. So if one of those guys drops out, you bet your bottom dollar Tarasov is coming into play. And he didn't just have an okay first stint. I mean, 4 games, 937 save percentage. He showed what he was made of before he also succumbed to injuries. But he is definitely in the Blue Jackets' long-term plans. And one of those guys above him will slot out. I would imagine that it's Korpisalo who slots out in the long term. But a 3-year deal, pretty sure it's a one-way deal for all 3 of those years at $1 million a piece. He's expected to make his way to the NHL roster sooner rather than later. And I would be surprised if we didn't see him in a Blue Jackets jersey at some point this season.
Yeah, well, injuries always, like we said, can factor quite a bit last year. So we'll see if Tarasov can play some games. And like I say, he looked really good before getting injured. So, and very unfortunate he did get injured because he was playing really well. Okay, Mark, we're finishing off now with the pairing the goaltending with the rest of these. You know, obviously the top is Shesterkin with the Rangers, but what do you see the Columbus Blue Jackets kind of slotting in?
Well, if they perform like they did last year, they'll be in the bottom. I mean, that's the truth of the matter. They cannot have a repeat performance, but there's a belief out there that Merzlikins has kind of gotten past what happened last summer with his friend. I think that he carried a lot of that into the season, especially around the holidays, and he openly admitted that it weighed on him. So I think he's going to come into the year kind of with a fresh start. And if he can perform like he did in his rookie year when he had 5 shutouts and 8 starts, you know, that upside is certainly still there. He can compete with any of them when he's playing his best. But like you said, there's Shesterkin, Jari, Freddie Anderson, Darcy Kemper's in the division now.
Yeah.
Ilya Sorokin is on some people's Vezina ballots already. Carter Hart's expected to be better, especially with Torstentown focusing on defense. And then Mackenzie Blackwood, I think, still is an interesting goalie for the Devils. And then you add Vanacek to that. Everybody has something to offer in the Metropolitan Division. So if the Blue Jackets are going to hope to get to the place they want to go, goaltending has to be better. Elvis Merzlikins has to put the stuff behind him, has to look forward. And there are times we might have to carry the team because if the defense doesn't improve as much as we think that they could, he could still see a ton of shots. He saw, I think, the second or third most shots in the league last year, and that trend could continue. So he's got to prove that he's ready to move forward with this. And if he can, I think that he can compete with almost anybody here. Maybe not Shesterkin, maybe not Sorokin, maybe not Kemper, who just won a cup, but when he's playing his best, he can certainly compete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I say, it's going to really come down to the defense a lot. Help him out. You got to help him out. So that's going to be interesting to watch. Yeah. Okay, well, let's move to our quick fire round here. And these are just going to do quick questions. It can be one-word answer. A sentence or two to explain why you're picking these guys for these questions. So I'm going to start with biggest storyline or question mark going into the season. We'll start with you, Mark.
Who slots in on the defense, especially right defense, but with Werenski, and then the way the rest of it shapes up?
All right, Nick.
For me, yeah, it's defense. It's got to be, are they going to be better this season?
Yeah, well, we've mentioned that quite a bit.
Yeah.
All right, Mark, 1 or 2 breakout stars?
Kirill Marchenko.
Good choice. Nick, what do you think?
Well, Mark stole the good one. I don't want to keep copying him. Let's go Kent Johnson.
Yes. Oh, yeah, Kent Johnson for sure.
Really?
All right, back to you, Mark. One player that needs to bounce back from last season.
Just talked about him, Elvis Merzlikins.
All right, Nick, what do you think?
That's a tough one. I'm going to say, I don't know if this is a bounce back as much as it's a step forward. Jake Bean.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If he doesn't show what he's made of this year, he's out of Columbus because there's so many defensemen.
Yeah, I definitely get behind that for sure. All right, Mark, X Factor.
Jack Roslovic, if he's the one that playing in the middle, it'd be a huge star if he ends up in that spot.
Yeah, we haven't talked about him yet. All right, Nick, what do you think?
Mark,
X Factor.
you're not allowed to go first anymore. Okay, Mark?
Oh, you can go first next time.
No,
How's that?
I'm just kidding.
I'll back to you.
I'll say Adam Boqvist.
Good
All right.
choice.
Nick, we'll start with you on this one then.
Oh, thank you.
Rookie or prospect that could surprise, make the roster out of training camp.
Yeah, I think Jiricek. We already talked about him, but that's the one guy who could pull it off.
All right, Mark, what do you think?
I said it earlier, but I'd say Marchenko.
Marchenko, yeah, for sure. I don't know if it'd be a big surprise because it's kind of expected, but you know, there's quite a few forwards to fight through. So
Exactly.
yeah, definitely surprise for sure. All right, Nick, I'll start with you again here. What other players should fans be watching? We have not mentioned on the show yet.
Really, we haven't talked about Gus Nyquist at all. This is his last season under contract with the Blue Jackets. He could be a trade target, but he could also be a guy who he loves Columbus. He could be a guy that would want to stick around at a discounted rate. He's just going to be steady and consistent and a great leader in the locker room.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, Mark, what do you think?
Give you a name that has not been brought up at all that I think is interesting, and it's Laine's best friend, Jonah Loto. Something just to kind of keep in mind. Interesting player, especially if he can crack the forward group.
Well, there you go. I wouldn't even thought about that one. So there you go. Okay, Nick, who will lead the team in scoring at forward?
Yeah, it's Gaudreau.
Gaudreau. All right,
Yeah.
Mark.
Johnny G all the way.
Yeah.
And on defense, this is probably a pretty obvious one, Nick.
Yeah, Zach Werenski, no question.
Mark, same thing.
I think he gets to 20 goals again. But yes, Zach Werenski.
Yeah, that's a pretty good. There's some teams that are pretty obvious on who leads it on defense.
Yes.
All right, start with you, Mark, on this one. Now, one player could be traded before the deadline.
Well, Nick kind of alluded to both of them. I have two names here, but I'll say just one of them for now. Gus Nyquist.
Yes, that's for sure. And Nick?
I'll take the other, who was Joonas Korpisalo.
Yes. All right. Both guys are going to be watched closely as the deadline comes for sure. All right. This is a fun one. Always fun to do these. Mark, one bold prediction or a hot take for the season.
Laine 50 goals.
Oh,
Stuff. Nick.
Hello. I'd say Igor Chinikov hits 15 goals. And I know that's not super bold, but based on how he played last year and how rarely he played, I would like to see a step forward at him.
Yes, for sure. Chinikov is a guy we haven't really mentioned either, but yeah, he could definitely. He had a pretty good stint with the Blue Jackets last year too. All right, big question here, Mark. Where will they finish in the standings, and will the Blue Jackets make the playoffs?
So get this: they get the 90, but they're 6th in the Metro and miss the playoffs.
Oh, miss the playoffs at 90 points. That's definitely a possibility in this division. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think they're in. They're definitely not in the playoffs this year. It could be close at points during the season, but over the stretch, I don't think so. Yeah, 6 sounds about right.
All right, but 90 points to be. Oh, geez, that's the playoffs that's happened.
That doesn't sound far off either.
It's not. Yeah, for sure. All right, this is a bonus question. Mark, what does James Neal make the team out of his PTO?
Yes. Yes,
Nick,
he does.
What do you think?
No way. You're off your rocker, Mark Scheig.
Why would they bring him in though? If they don't think there's a shot there.
Throw him in Cleveland.
Huh.
He had a good age. He had a really good AHL season, that's for sure.
He'd be great in Cleveland helping the youngsters.
But I definitely see him in Columbus too. I wanted to add that in. That's one I'm kind of interested in.
It's just, who do you take out? That's the big question for me. I don't see James Neal coming in and being any better than anyone else who's on that roster.
If the kids aren't ready, send them to Cleveland and put Neal as a placeholder.
Yeah.
And it's low risk. I mean, you're not going to sign him to a big deal at all. And if he can come in and start filling the net, why not?
Yeah. He still can play, and definitely showed that in the AHL. So we'll have to see. That's going to be a bit of a storyline as well into training camp. Okay, to finish off the show, we love doing this on our Hockey Writers podcast, but I'm not going to pick an article of the day. I'll let you guys do this. Mark, we'll start with you. Article of the day from the Columbus Blue Jackets writing team. It can be your own. A lot of people have been doing that. But if you have an article they want to feature.
Yeah, so we talked about Gaudreau a lot here, and I recently wrote an article. He just made the point that he was not brought on to be the savior of the team, that the Columbus Blue Jackets, even before him, were heading in the right direction. And so the name of the article is Blue Jackets Gaudreau was not signed to save the franchise. And we just go over the reasons as to why that is the case, why they're still going to be good, and what he's ultimately going to do is going to help them, but he's definitely not going to save the franchise. And I think that there was a little bit of a thought by some that he was, some sort of Jesus saving person, but at this point, not really.
No, that shouldn't be expected. So definitely check that article out if you want to know more about Gaudreau and that stuff. That's a really good article. All right, Nick, what article you want to feature?
I'm really glad that Mark picked one of his own, so I didn't have to look like the only narcissist in the Blue Jackets writing staff.
We got narcissists all around, so.
So I just did a series. I did 3 Blue Jackets who are primed to break out in 22-23. That one is already out. I'm just putting the finishing touches on 3 Blue Jackets who need to prove themselves in 22-23. Some familiar names that we've talked about across this show, so keep your eyes open for that.
Nice. All right, definitely check out those 2 articles. Check out all the articles with the Columbus Blue Jackets writing team. They do a great job over there, and Mark heads up that for sure, being the credentialed writer. So check out both those articles. Check out all the articles, all our preview stuff we've got on the hockeywriters.com. We're just pumping them out every day. Lots of stuff coming out. We got the season preview shows coming out, 1 a day. And of course, all the articles out there too. Check out our quick fire show that we've got going on as well. We got 2 episodes of that come out. Really short videos that just kind of do some quick takes, and we bring in like 3 people from the writing team. We just answer some quick questions. So check that out at the Hockey Writers YouTube channel and all the stuff on the hockeywriters.com. And thanks again for coming on the show, Mark and Nick, for previewing the Columbus Blue Jackets coming into this season. They're going to be an interesting team to watch moving forward. So, and we'll see you next time on another Hockey Writers podcast preview show.